All right. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Hey, Denise, how are you? Um, Good evening, my Facebook and YouTube and Periscope and Instafam. It's Thursday night again, and I'm back with another episode of Change Talk. Tonight's topic that we're going to get into, I think, is one that is important just in general, that we talk about. We're going to be talking about trauma, and it would seem to be a pretty heavy topic, but it's not really. I'm going to try and lighten it up as much as we can. So, as you're coming in, feel free to share the stream with your friends and followers, um, and jump in, say hey, like Denise did on Insta. Say hey, let me know where you are joining me from. And as we go through, if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, feel free to just jump right in the chat and share them, because I would absolutely love to hear from you and get your thoughts um, on our conversation tonight. All right. Let me make sure that I can do that. All right. I got the comment screen open. Hey, Doc. So I guess an introduction would be nice. If you have not joined our Change Talk broadcast before, my name is Tiffany Jenkins, and I am the founder and CEO of Awakening Change Counseling Services in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And I jump on every Thursday night at 9 for a couple of minutes just to share some tidbits and some tips and tools with you on issues related to your mental health, your professional health, and self-care. Self-care is really big. I think we've been talking about that quite a bit recently, and for good reason. So, um, back here, I have a proof copy. This is not the actual book, but a proof copy of the book on self care that I wrote, called Reclaiming Your Time, A Black Woman's Guide to Self Care. Yes, ma'am, Doc. I defend tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Um, so I wrote this book on self care. It is a Black woman's guide to self care, but it is there are principles that are applicable to everyone. So if you have not already, you might want to click the link in the bio, because as of today, I only literally have 18 pre-ordered copies left. And what that means is the um, 82 people who have already ordered will have a personalized and signed copy, as well as a box full of some really cool goodies from me. So I'm excited about that. Thank you, Doc. Yes, Denise, proof copy, right? And thank God for the proof copy, because when I opened it, I realized that there was one page that was a little out of sync. So thank God for the proofing, right? I always say progress over perfection. And so that has rung true even with this process. Doc said, y'all order a book. book. Denise, yes, you did get your copy in. So thank you, thank you, thank you so much for that. Doc already has her copy. It's really a labor of love, and part of the reason why I wrote the book relates to the topic that we're going to be talking about today, which is about trauma and the many ways that trauma can show up and present itself in our lives, right? And so part of the reason for writing the book was that in my work, personally and professionally, so just in my own life and in the lives of the women that I worked with, what I was finding is that racialized trauma is one of the traumas that we don't talk very much about, but it disproportionately, in my opinion, affects Black women because of Black women being kind of used as the double minority that can check two boxes at one time. And it's very easy for companies, for organizations to be very performative in their choice of us, right? And so last year in November, I was part of an anthology with 20 women telling their stories, and I was one of the three experts that contributed, called Shut 'Em Down. That's Shut 'Em Down, Black Women, Racism in Corporate America. Y'all can go get that on Amazon. Um, I was part of that project, and what I found is that so many of us as Black women have had these traumatic experiences that we haven't really talked about, because it's just kind of accepted that, oh, that's corporate America, that's just the way things are. But it's not. It is traumatic, and so that was one of the things that led me to writing this book, because we don't take enough care of ourselves and do the things that are important for ourselves to really get the healing that we need from trauma. And we need to do that. It is very important. Literally, the generations that are coming after us are depending on our ability to successfully heal from all of the things we went through. What happened to us may not be our fault, but our healing is 100% our responsibility. And so that's where that project came from. And that's also where this conversation is kind of coming from as well. Last week, we talked about workplace trauma, and we talked specifically about the ways that being in some work environments can be triggering to mental illness, and be the opposite of what we need for our mental health. So let's be clear. Mental illness is the lack of mental health. What we're trying to strive for is mental health. We want wholeness. We want harmony. We want balance in our lives. We want peace in our lives, right? Someone tried to justify staying in a trauma-filled workspace today. Whoo! She said you have to do what you have to do to get where you have to be. And see, that's the kind of thinking that keeps us stuck. And that actually is called chronic trauma. So let's dig into it. Let's dig into it. When I say trauma, what do I mean? Right? When I say trauma, I mean an emotional response to a terrible event. That's it. it There are many types of trauma, and we're going to talk about some of the faces of trauma and the way trauma can present itself for different people. But all I'm saying is an emotional response to a terrible event. And because you don't get to determine for me what that terrible event is, then you can't tell me whether or not I've been traumatized. And we talked about that a little bit last week when we were talking about some of these horrible, crazy workspaces, and the ways that they impact our mental condition. We use the example of Naomi Osaka and her decision to step back from some media stuff. So you can catch that on any of the social media pages, or go to the YouTube channel and just rewatch that episode and take a look at some of the things we talked about there. So that kind of covered the workplace trauma. But when we first started understanding what trauma and stress was, right? When we started talking about PTSD, the first examples we had of that were veterans who were returning from war, right? And so it was like war syndrome, and we had words like that to describe this stress, because we thought it was just something that, war is very brutal and very traumatic, and they've seen a lot of things. And so that was the language that we had, and that was the group that we had that we were kind of targeting to talk about it, right? And this month, PTSD Awareness Month, focuses largely on our veterans who have had a difficult time adjusting after seeing some of the atrocities that they were experiencing in their active duty, right? So part of The reason why we even have a trauma awareness month or a PTSD awareness month is in large part because of our veterans. And we are so grateful for their service, and we don't want to diminish what they've gone through. But tonight, my challenge to you is to understand that it's so much more. That if you are a Black person living in America, you have experienced what's considered chronic or even complex trauma, right? And that is, you have had some experiences living in a system that was not designed for you. And that's not my personal opinion. We have a number of documents from our founding fathers, even like, we don't even have to go to like current research. The documents that the country was founded on treated individuals of African descent as property and not people. So the system, even when America was fighting for her independence, Black people were not included in that independence, which is why we celebrate Juneteenth, some of us, because that symbolizes when the Emancipation Proclamation was read and the slaves were officially free. So um, that there's racialized trauma, and anybody who's followed me for any amount of time knows that I speak a lot about racialized trauma and its impact on a number of things in our community. I'll be presenting at a workshop in October, the Trauma and Addiction Conference sponsored by Rutgers University. And I'll be talking about this specifically with Black women. So if you're a professional and you're in New Jersey, I would definitely hope that you would join me for that talk. That's going to be really interesting. Typically, when we talk about trauma, the other group that we think about are people who have experienced sexual assault, physical assault, domestic violence, those type of things, right? And those instances are traumatic, especially for children. And we have a lot of research that shows that the younger that a child is when they've experienced some of these things, the more deeply it impacts them, and it can affect their growth and their development and literally even their health. We've got a ton of research on that. What we don't talk enough about, though, is how poverty is also traumatic. And not having sufficient access to resources that folks need to take care of their basic living needs is traumatic. It puts stress on the person and puts them in a terrible series of events. So it's not a singular one-time event. Poverty happens over time. So it really becomes a chronic and complex level of trauma that affects us on a very deep emotional level. Our emotional development can be stunted, and we can adopt some really, we call them maladaptive coping mechanisms, which is kind of a bad way to put it, because it helped us to adapt. It's just not the best way we could have done so, right? And so there's a lot that folks who have lived in poverty have to undo in their adulthood to be successful and what we would consider productive members of society, right? There's also things like divorce and surviving bad relationships. That's traumatic. To have this idea that you had this happily ever after, and then for whatever reason, that kind of gets broken up and destroyed, that is traumatic. That is disruptive. That can cause some severe emotional pain, right? Even if eventually you're happy to be away from that person and the divorce is a good thing, the process of the divorce, the paperwork, the conversations, the negotiations, all of that stuff can be very stressful. And so if you've been through a divorce, please don't let anybody tell you that you have not survived trauma. Divorce is traumatic. And I don't think we give that enough space either. Another one that I don't think we give space to is not just not just divorce. So divorce is like you were married, your marriage ends, but bad relationships in general can be traumatic. If you were in a relationship where your needs were not being met, If you were in a relationship, even if you're trying to co-parent with someone who you no longer really like, if you've been, felt like you were gaslit, your feelings weren't validated, all of that, that could be a traumatic experience. So that's trauma. And if you have children together and you have to deal with this person on a regular basis, seeing them over and over again can re-traumatize you, until you no longer have to see them again. The kids are old enough to navigate that on their own. It can be really traumatic. So Tiff, what's the point of all this? The point of all of this is that all of us, if we are honest with ourselves in some way, shape, or form, has had access to or experience with trauma. And so it's not this big, ugly, out there thing that only affects weak people. Because I've heard that a lot from folks, and it really makes me want to scream. Dealing with trauma, regardless of how you handle it or how you carry it, it's not a sign of weakness. Really, what your body is going to do and your brain is going to try to do, it's going to try to protect you at all costs. And the way that your brain figures out how to do that, it may not necessarily be what is the best choice or the healthiest choice, but it's the choice that used the resources that you had available in that moment to help get you through it. We've all got some kind of trauma story if we look deep enough. And I want us to really be more sensitive when we start talking about mental health in general, right? Because after the issue with Naomi Osaka, there were a lot of folks who started throwing around insults, really, about when you're trying to have conversations about how traumatic some experiences can be. You had some very judgmental people who were comparing her stress to someone who maybe had experienced a house fire, or someone who was emotionally abused, or any of those things. And comparison is the thief of joy. Yes. But comparison is a very dangerous place, because the nature of trauma says that you don't get to tell me how I feel about what I've lived through. That's just not the way it happens. You can have 6 people who have all experienced the same event, and all 6 of those people will remember that event differently. So if you take nothing away from today, I want you to understand that, how does the saying go? Don't judge a person until you've walked a mile in their moccasins. Really be careful with how you're dealing with people in 2021, because the fact that we've all survived COVID with varying degrees of survival, with varying degrees of scars from this pandemic, we're all trauma survivors right now. We all have that in common. We have survived a very traumatic space, and we are still working through a very traumatic space in our time. And so it's not okay to compare traumas and say, well, it wasn't this bad, so that's not really traumatic. It's only trauma if it's this bad. Cut it out. We've all lived through something, and we all have a story to tell. And I would encourage you to find ways to be more supportive, first, of yourself, and understand that it took a lot for you to survive some of the things that you've survived. Give yourself that space and that grace to appreciate how far you've come. But then, too, to have a little bit more compassion for someone else. All right. Let's check the comments real quick. 400 years of slavery was trauma that has been passed down. Absolutely. Multi-generational trauma exists in a bunch of different ways. And Dr. Joy DeGroy has a great book that is somewhere on my bookshelf called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome, which talks about the impact of slavery on Black folks in America. And it's very interesting. Emotional trauma is a thing. Yes. All trauma technically is emotional. Dealing with kids after divorce is traumatic. Yep. Finding out more secrets after the divorce is traumatic. Bad parents, definitely a traumatic experience. And bad parents doesn't necessarily mean that your parents were abusive. They may have been emotionally unavailable. That's traumatic. As a kid, when you're learning to navigate this emotional landscape, especially teenagers and all of that, when you're learning how to navigate that and you don't have anyone to support you in that. I have a client who had experienced some trauma, and her family pretty much denied that it ever happened to her. That was trauma on top of trauma. Because to have someone try to invalidate what you're feeling and what you've experienced, that's a difficult situation. When someone hasn't taken care of their trauma, they like to criticize another's healing process. That happens more time than I care to acknowledge, Denise. Like, it, you can't judge someone's process, because the resources that you have available that help you navigate your trauma in your space may not be resources that I have available to me, right? Like, I think about, I'm a church baby, so I probably have like a church story for everything. But I think back to the story in the Bible of David and Goliath, right? And we always talk about how David was able to slay Goliath with like a slingshot and some stones. But before he gets there, in the story, King Saul tries to give David his armor. And David says David was too small for the king's armor. And so he said, I can't use these because I haven't proven them yet. In other words, I don't know how these work. I'm not familiar with these things. So I can't go and fight literally the biggest battle of my life to this point using your stuff. I have to use what I know. And what did David know? David knew slingshots and stones. And we know what happened from there. David went, he picked up five smooth stones, and he whips him up and he slays Goliath, right? So part of this healing process is knowing what our tools look like. And that's where a therapist comes in. As much as some of this work, you may be able to get to the point of realizing that it's traumatic on your own. You're not really going to be able to walk through this without a skilled professional, because you're not going to be able to just pick up everybody else's tools and put them on. When it comes to our healing, one size does not fit all. You have to do the things that work for you. It has to be an individualized process where you do what you need in this moment for you. And here's the thing, what you need in this moment and in this phase of your healing journey might be a little different than when you get to another part of your journey. Like, it's okay. Seeing a therapist doesn't make you crazy. It doesn't mean you're out of your mind. It just means that you need a safe space to unpack the things that have happened to you, the things that have happened around you, and most importantly, the things that are happening within you, right? So, yes, normalize going to therapy. And that's not because I'm a therapist. It's because therapy works. Therapy works. Let's see. I'm glad you like the analogy, Denise. I'm a storyteller by nature, so it makes giving analogies makes it easier for me to think of too. So I've gotten everybody's comments. I'm so happy that you guys have joined me. If you happen to have jumped in late or are catching the replay, then just hashtag replay. Let me know that you're joining from there. If you have any questions or comments or concerns, drop them right into the comments for the video, or you can visit the website, www.awakeningchange.org. Shoot me a note from there. And last call, if you have not gotten your book, you want to grab it today, because I can probably guarantee that there are not going to be any books left by the end of this week, or by the end of tomorrow's the end of week, in a week from now. Next week, Doc, you literally took the words out of my mouth. Next week, hopefully I'll be sharing with you guys about my process through my dissertation journey. If nothing else strikes me, um because on tomorrow, like I said earlier, at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, I will be defending my dissertation. It will be my final defense. And many of you have messaged me and asked me, no, I will not be officially Dr. Jenkins after tomorrow. I do have to wait until I get the dean's signature to officially be Dr. Jenkins, but this is pretty much the last leg of my journey. After I defend tomorrow, then I just have some formatting issues, and then we're good to go from there. So next week, I hope to share with you a little bit more about my process. And unless something really juicy happens in the news, I think that's what we're going to be talking about next week. So I thank you all again for tuning in with me. Hey, and yes, Doc, they won't let me call myself Dr. Jenkins until the dean signs it. I don't make the rules, I just try to live by them. But I thank you to everyone who has been supportive, all of you guys who have shared the channel, subscribed to the channel. I really appreciate you. We've got some really, really cool things coming up in the next couple of months. Finally, now that all of this dissertation drama is resolving itself. But I really appreciate you guys coming and hanging out with me. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I know, Doc, you've been calling me Dr. Jenkins for a while now, so I know. And if you have any comments, things you'd like to hear me talk about, that you'd like to get some tips on or some tools for, feel free to drop in the DMs or www.awakeningchange.org. I really, really, really appreciate you guys. It's already done. It is already done. I really am believing that it's done. Tomorrow it's done. And it's just a formality after that. So I've already got my t-shirts ready. So next week when I come on, I'll probably have a new custom t-shirt. Yeah, but there's some great stuff in store. Thank you, Doc. That means a lot. Doc is fussing at everybody to order a book already. If you haven't gotten your book, like I said, go to the website, go into the links in the DMs, the links in the bio, I'm sorry, or DM me for more information, especially if you have a larger order. I'd be more than happy to help accommodate that. Just let me know. All right. So thank you guys. I'm proud to ride in your cohort and know you. Oh, Denise, thank you. I'm so happy to be with you. Denise, you have to be on here. We need to get your book finished so then you can come and share about your experiences, because you have a really, really phenomenal story that I think everybody needs to hear. So I'm honored to have met you. Let's see. I think that's it. I really think that's it, guys. Thank you so much. Share this video, share the channel. And I will see you guys next week. Toodles.